Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video, voted by our Patreon, will be the Tesseract Bolt. If you want to get involved in our polls that direct the channel, then head on over to our Patreon, links in the top right for you now. You can also become a member of Planet 40k's YouTube channel by clicking the join button from a PC or Mac. Another way of helping the channel is to simply watch the ads for 30 seconds, free and easy to do, and it really helps keep the channel running. Right, with the intro out the way, let's get stuck in. The Tesseract Bolt is a Lord of War. Unfortunately, Lords of War have been nerfed massively this edition due to them needing to pay command points to take detachments nowadays. So you're going to need to take a super heavy auxiliary detachment, which is 3 command points, just to be able to take the Bolt, so not a great start. The Bolt itself is 25 power, or a whopping 500 points for the model. So in smaller games you won't really want to field it, especially if there's objectives on the table. Now starting off with the keywords of note. It's got the Dynasty keyword, it's a Catan shard, a vehicle, it's Titanic and can fly. So even though it's got the Dynasty keyword, it can't actually benefit from detachment abilities. Now this is found on the bottom of page 246 from the main rulebook. It's also a Catan shard, so that also has the same effect. So already 2 bad points and we've barely started. So it's a vehicle, so it can be shooting into combat, and being Titanic means it can fall back and still shoot as normal. Also fly may be handy getting over terrain and other models. So looking at the stats, the Bolt has a degrading stat line, so when it's at 16 or more wounds, it will have the top stat line, which is movement 8 inch, weapon skill 6+, ballistic skill 3+, strength 8, toughness 7, wounds 30, attack 6, leadership 10 and a 2+ save. So when it's between 9 and 15 wounds, it drops a few inch of movement, a point in ballistic skill, and the attacks drop to D6. And then when it's got 8 or less of those wounds, the same stats decrease a bit further. So 30 wounds is a boatload of wounds, and on a 2+ save as well, it's going to make it very hard to deal with. Just to add to that resilience, it also has Transtemporal Force Field, which gives it a 4+ invuln save. It's then got Living Metal, regaining a lost wound at the start of each turn. It's then got Vengeance of the Enchained. So when the model is destroyed, roll 1d6 before removing it from play, and on a 4+, it explodes, and each unit within 2d6 suffers d6 mortal wounds. So a mega size explosion here, and on a 4+2, not a 6+. Its final ability is Hovering, which is where distances are measured to and from either the model's hull or base, whichever is closest. And in this case, the base is a lot smaller than the hull, so you will be using the hull. So that's the stats and the abilities. Let's move on to the weaponry. So a Tesseract Bolt is equipped with 4 Tesla spheres. So each Tesla sphere is 24 inch range, assault 4, strength 7, no AP and 1 damage. And each time you make an attack with the weapon, on an unmodified hit roll of a 6, you will score 2 additional hits. So basically you've got 4 of these, meaning you've got 16 shots. You could split fire them in lots of 4 if you chose to do so. I'll do a breakdown of what to expect from this weapon. Now the general rule for Tesla with ballistic skill 3 is any shots that you miss should on average be returned to you due to the 6s you roll. So with 16 shots, after adding back the extra attacks from 6s, you should roughly get 16 hits. Now, the weapon is strength 7 but no AP and single damage. So this kind of weapon is in a bit of no man's land at the moment with the current edition, as no AP and 1 damage is built perfectly for horde type units. Even 2 wound infantry with a lot of shots can work, but strength 7 feels a bit too high to be shooting at, say, a standard guardsman unit. So let's say you decide to take on the infantry for now. Toughness 3 means you wound on 2s, so you should net 13.3 wounds on average, resulting in about 11 dead models if they had a 6+ armor save. Toughness 4 up to toughness 6 is now 3s to wound, so this decreases the figure slightly to 10.7 wounds on average. And if they did have a 3+ armor save and 2 wounds like an intercessor, then you'll kill one and put a wound on another. So pretty poor against power armor. Now let's try this against a toughness 7 vehicle. With 16 hits you need 4s to wound, so 8 wounds will land. If the vehicle has a 3+ armor save, then they're only going to take 2.7 wounds, which again is not that great. So really the weapon is only really for anti-light infantry. So we know in the shooting phase what it does, but what about when it's using its Catan powers in the movement phase? So the model knows 4 Catan powers from the powers of the Catan, and at the end of the movement phase, if the model did not advance or fall back, it can use any number of Catan powers it knows equal to the table below, and it cannot use the same power twice. So basically it loses a Catan power usage each time it's bracketed on the damage table. So even though we've done a few videos now going through Catan models with the powers, we should go through them again purely as each power interacts slightly differently with the Tesseract Bolt. So power 1 is Antimatter Meteor, so on a roll of a d6 add 1 to the roll if the Catan shard is the Tesseract Bolt. On a 3 to a 5, the closest enemy unit within 24 inches and visible to the Catan shard suffers 3 mortal wounds. And on a 6+, the unit suffers D3 plus 3. So nice and simple here. This will go off on a 2+ due to it being a Tesseract Bolt. And you'll also have more of a chance of getting a 6+, because if you roll a 5 it will become a 6. So right off the bat you can already see the Vault interacts a lot better with the powers. So bear in mind the power works on the closest enemy unit here, similar to Smite. So power 2 times arrow, you select one enemy unit within 18 inches and visible to the Catan Shard. Roll 1d6, adding 1 to the roll if it's a Vault, and if the total equals or exceeds the wounds characteristic of any models in the unit, the opponent selects one of those models to be destroyed. So let's say for example you pick a unit of Terminators that have 3 wounds each. As you're a Tesseract Vault, you only need a 2+ to kill a single model. Now a few things to note here is firstly, this can work on characters, as it's not a shooting attack, so there's no lookout sir. Secondly, you haven't caused the enemy model any wounds, so there's no feel no pain saves here. And thirdly, you need to use the wounds characteristic of the model's datasheet rather than how many wounds they've got remaining for the model, so it's quite easy to get that bit wrong. So this is a pretty powerful, especially on characters with a low wound count such as a Psyker or a Chaplain, and you have half a chance of removing one. Power 3, Sky of Falling Stars. Select up to 3 enemy units within 24 inches of your Catan Shard, and for each of those units roll 1d6, and on a 1 to a 5, if the result is less than the number of models in the unit will suffer d3 mortal wounds. And if it's a Tesseract Bolt, it's going to be a flat 3 mortal wounds instead of a d3. So it always fails on 6s regardless. You need to roll below the model count of the unit. Not always the easiest to do, especially with 3 units. So good against mid and large size units. If you target units that have 6 models, then that's only a 6 that fails. A 5-man unit will fail on a roll of a 5+, as you need to roll less than the amount of models in the unit. The Vault does interact with the power, but it doesn't really affect the dice this time. Power 4, Cosmic Fire. Roll 1d6 for each enemy unit within 9 inches of the Catan Shard, and on a 4+, the unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. And if it's a Tesseract Bolt, it's going to be a flat 3 again. So another power that isn't affected by dice due to being a Tesseract Bolt, but if you can get close, this is great as it's got no limits on how many enemy units you can affect. It also works on characters too. Something to think about here is the size of the Vault. Now this thing's about 10 inches wide, so it has a huge amount of area. And also remember it's got the hovering ability, so you don't measure from its base, you measure from its hull. So you will miss half the dice here, but for example if you tag 4 units within 9-inch range, on average you'll miss 2 of those, but still inflict 3 mortal wounds on the other 2 units. Power 5 is Seismic Assault. Select one enemy unit within 18 inches and visible to your Catan Shard. Roll 1d6 for each model in the unit, adding 1 to the roll if you're a Tesseract Bolt. For each 6+, the unit suffers 1 mortal wound to a max of 10 mortal wounds. So this is your anti-horde power. A unit of 18 models will usually get you 3 6s on average, but as you're a Tesseract Bolt, it's only going to need 5s, so you'll get about 6 on average. Against smaller units, it's not really worth taking over the other powers. And against a 12-man unit, it's okay because you're going to get about 4 mortal wounds. Then finally, Power 6, Transdimensional Thunderbolt. Select one enemy unit within 24 inches and visible to your Catan Shard. An enemy character unit that has the wounds characteristic of 9 or less cannot be selected while it is within 3 of any enemy unit unless the character unit is the closest visible enemy unit. You roll 1d6 and on a 2+, the unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. Then roll 1d6 for all enemy units within 3 inches of that selected unit, and on a 4+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. If you're using a Tesseract Bolt, roll for each enemy unit within 6 inches rather than 3 inch. So it's a larger bolt of thunder due to being a Tesseract Bolt. Never really been keen on this one, as it's only d3 mortal wounds on the first unit and 1 mortal wound on the others within 6. It's great against factions that stay quite tight together or castle up, but against the current meta 1 mortal wound isn't really enough. There's better options in my opinion. So that's the powers summed up. The Vault model gets to know 4 of them, which is pretty good. All depends on who you're playing with your selections, as some are anti-horde and some aren't. Against Marines, I'd probably drop the Seismic Assault and the Transdimensional Thunderbolt and take the other 4. Moving away from the crazy powers of the Catan, let's discuss some of the stratagems for you to use on the model, starting with Strange Echoes to replace a power you know for a power you don't know. Now as you already know 4, you probably won't need to use this, as you've already most likely dropped the 2 that you don't like anyway, but it's there if you need it. Dimensional Destabilization for 2 CP lets you roll a d6 and whatever the result is corresponds to the power number you can use. And you can use that power in addition to your powers, so even if you've already used that Catan power that phase, you can still use it. So it's not bad, as they all at least do something. Curse of the Pharaon for 3 CP as your Titanic lets you auto explode rather than trying to roll a 4+. Remember the range is 2d6 and the damage is d6, so just make sure your own models aren't within range so you don't get hurt. Malevolent Arcing for 1 CP used in the shooting phase for your Tesla weapons. After making attacks, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 6 inches of the targeted unit, and on a 4+, they will also suffer a mortal wound. Again, good against units that are clumped together or castling up. You can also catch characters with this one too. So that's all the stratagems. To conclude with the model, 30 wounds, toughness 7 and a 4 up invuln with living metal on top is outrageous. It's got the highest wound count for a model within the Codex, and it's also the most expensive. It's extremely tough and will require your opponent to focus fire on it a few turns to tear it down, so you need to get in with it fast and do as much damage as possible before it's gone. Ideally, you want to combine the Vault with a few quick Alpha Strike units such as Ophidian Destroyers or a Veil of Time unit of Lich Guard, so that in turn 2 you can give your opponent something to really think about. If you can target your opponent's big guns with the melee units, then it's going to keep the Vault around much longer. The Ophidian Destroyers are probably a better option in this case, with their speed and the fact that they can go on their own without needing a relic character. Wraiths can also do a good job on foot. Might actually be a better way of doing it, as your opponent will have to start making a difficult decision from turn 1. They can either lead the Vault up and running or start chipping away at the Wraiths on a 4+ invuln. For me, the Tesseract Vault doesn't work well in a shooting gun list, as it's going to get picked off very early and you're not going to make max use of your powers. Now the model costs 500 points, which is a huge chunk of points. So that's 500 points that could have been put into objective secured troops, for example, and with 9th edition being quite heavily focused on objectives right now, 500 points on a single model doesn't go hand in hand with that. So be aware that in smaller games with objectives, you may struggle to score. Having 4 Catan powers and using up to 3 depending on your damage is pretty solid. The damage output is going to really do a number on your opponent. Now the Tesla Spheres are more of a bonus to chip away wounds, but don't be too disheartened if they don't do that much. Now they don't have any damage output in melee, unfortunately. Okay, 6 attacks is okay, but you're hitting on 6s, so you're only really going to score 1 single hit on average. And strength 8 will likely cause a wound, so it's at least something. But you can fall back as normal if you wanted to anyway, so not much to worry about. Sometimes staying in combat is actually better, as now you can't be targeted by all the ranged fire, and you can use your powers of the Catan to trim the charging unit down to soften the damage you're going to take in combat, all while still using the Catan powers elsewhere. Something else to note for the unit is a comparison with other Catan Shard models. They've all got Necrodermis, which allows them to only take 3 wounds per phase. Now I know this would be quite overpowered if you put this on the Tesseract Vault, but I think they should have something in a similar vein, but in a larger quantity, maybe 8 per phase. Now I recently played against a Bloodthirster with a similar rule and it made a huge difference. Anyway, as for rating, I'm going to be giving the Tesseract Bolt a Planet 40k rating of 3 out of 5. It has a damage output to deserve maybe a 3.5, but paying 3 command points before the game even begins is a little bit of a blow. Then 500 points on an objective heavy game is another kicker. You'll be spending a lot of the game trying to prevent your opponent from scoring by using your powers, rather than actually scoring your own points. In bigger games he is more at home, but then your opponent has also got more anti-tank weapons to play with, so your Vault will probably be taken down even quicker than normal. That's my thoughts today. Put yours down below. Question of the day: are Lords of War worth it in 9th edition? A simple yes or no. Obviously you pay 3 command points to use a super heavy auxiliary detachment, so that's really the question: is it worth it? Guys, drop a like on the way out, sub if you've enjoyed the content. Now while recording this video we're at 2,500 subs, looking to get across the 3k line. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next one.